Pour yourself something warm and turn the lamp down low and come sit with me a while. Because tonight I want to tell you about a rule that no officer in the United States Army would ever put his name to, and about the men who learned the hard way why it was there. Away down in the southeast corner of the Yellowstone country, in the high lonesome where the big rivers start and the snow lies 8 months of the year, there is a stretch of black timber that the soldiers who guarded that park more than 120 years ago had a private name for. It is not on any map you will find. The Army never wrote it down, and that was the whole point. They called it the Blackwood, and every man who served a winter at that post learned, soldier to soldier, and never on paper, that you did not go into the Blackwood after dark, and you did not answer it when it called. Now you have to understand how that country was kept back then, because it was not kept the way it is now. There were no park rangers in the green trucks yet. From back in the 1880s, clear up past the Great War, the place was guarded by the cavalry of the United States Army, real soldiers out of Fort Yellowstone up at Mammoth, troopers in blue wool and campaign hats who spent their enlistments chasing poachers through snow up to a horse's belly and freezing in little log soldier stations 100 miles from a warm bed. It was hard, mean, lonely duty, and the men who did it were not the kind to spook at shadows. That is the first thing you have to hold on to. The men in this story were soldiers, not children. They did not believe in much, and they kept this rule anyway. I had all of this, every part of it, from a man named Wilford Tice, who everybody called Will, and who in the year I am telling you about was a first sergeant at that post, a hard old veteran of nearly 20 years in the saddle. He told it to me when he was a very old man and I was young, and he told it the way a man tells a thing he has carried so long it has worn smooth, quiet, and plain, and without 1 ounce of trying to make you believe him. He did not care whether I believed him. He had stopped needing anybody to believe him a long time before. He only wanted, I think, to set it down once with somebody before he died. The way you would finally pay off a debt you had carried so long you had near forgot you owed it. Will Tice said the rule did not start with the Army at all. The Army only inherited it. Long before there was a fort or a flag or a single trooper in that country, the people who had lived in those high mountains, the sheep-eater folk, the ones who wintered up where nobody else could, they kept off that ground. They had kept off it for longer than anybody could say. And when the first soldiers came and started learning the backcountry, it was an old sheep-eater scout, a man the troopers called Old Bannock, though that was not his name. His name was Pasiga, who took the first sergeants aside and taught them the rule, slow and careful, the way you would teach a child to handle a loaded gun. Pasiga did not explain it much. The old man told Will that when he was young and pushed Pasiga for a reason, the scout just looked at him a long while and said that some country is somebody's already, and the only safe thing to be on it is a guest, and a guest goes home before dark. That was all he would give. But he gave the rule itself complete, in 5 parts, and Will Tice could still say all 5 of them in order when he was 90 years old, the way another man might still know his catechism. You patrol the Blackwood by daylight, and only by daylight. You are clear of that timber before the sun is off it. After dark, you never answer a call out of it, not a hail, not a bugle, not a voice, not even a voice you know better than your own mother's. You never show a light toward it in the night, and if a man does not come back to you before dark, you do not go in after him. You wait for first light, and you go in then. and you bring back what you find. That last one was the one that broke men. You will see why. Will said that for years, the rule just was, the way the cold just was, and the distance just was. One more hard fact of that country that you obeyed without thinking about it, because the men older than you obeyed it. A new trooper would come up green and laugh about it the first week, and the old hands would not argue with him. They would just watch him, not unkind, the way you watch a boy who has been told the stove is hot and has not touched it yet. And sooner or later, that country would teach him one small thing. Some evening at the edge of that timber, when the light went wrong and a sound came that should not have come, and after that he did not laugh anymore. He kept the rule like everybody else, and when the next green boy came up, he watched him the same quiet way. That was how it passed. Not as a story, as a habit nobody would explain and nobody would break. And it might have gone on like that forever. A thing the Army did, without admitting it did. Except that in the autumn of 1903 there came up to that post a brand new officer, fresh from back east, fresh from the school where they make officers, a lieutenant named Royal Wexler. Will Tice was careful when he spoke of Wexler, to be fair to him, and I will try to be too, because the easy thing is to make him a fool, and he was not a fool. He was a clever, brave, ambitious young man who had read a great many books and meant to make something of himself in that army. And he came into that country seeing exactly what a clever, ambitious young man would see. He saw a garrison of rough, half-educated, superstitious enlisted men who had a piece of mountain they would not patrol properly after dark, who told a foolish ghost story to excuse it, and who had let a heathen scout's campfire tale harden into something they treated like a standing order. He saw, in plain words, malingering dressed up as folklore, and he decided, the way a young man who wants to be noticed decides things, that he was going to be the officer who fixed it. The old sergeant said he could not even be very angry at Wexler about it. Not then, and not after. The lieutenant was only seeing what his whole life had trained him to see. He did not have the one thing that would have saved him, and saved all of them, which was a single winter in that country, with his own eyes open. He had book sense and nerve, and a head full of the modern age, and not one of those three things is any use at all against a thing that has been keeping that timber since before there was a book, or a flag, or a single living memory of when it started. He came up the road to Fort Yellowstone on a cold, bright afternoon in October, Will said, with his fine new gear and his fine straight back, and he meant to do a great deal of good. And the old man told me that he has thought about that afternoon more nights than he could count. The lieutenant riding in so sure, the aspens already gone gold and starting to drop, and the Blackwood lying off there to the southeast under the first snow, patient as it had always been, in no hurry at all, waiting the way it always waited, for somebody to do exactly the thing that Royal Wexler had just ridden 1,000 miles to do. So leave a light on at home tonight, the easy kind, the kind that means somebody is up and waiting on you, and keep it pointed at your own door. We will get to the other kind soon enough. Now I have to tell you what the Army was even doing out in that country, because if you do not understand that, none of the rest of it will make sense, and you will wonder why grown men kept walking back toward a place that frightened them. They were there for the poachers. That is the plain truth of it, and it is not romantic at all. By the turn of the century, the buffalo were just about gone from the whole face of the earth, and one of the last little wild herds left anywhere was up in that park, and a buffalo head in those years was worth more than a soldier made in a season. So men came after them, hard men, market hunters, and hide thieves, who would snowshoe in over the passes in the dead of winter, when nobody could follow easy, and kill what they could, and pack the heads and hides out before a patrol ever cut their trail. And the only thing standing between those few last animals and the end of them was the cavalry. So the cavalry went where the poachers went. And the poachers, because they were not fools either, learned fast that the one stretch of country no patrol would work hard after dark was that black timber down in the southeast. They started running their lines through the edge of the Blackwood on purpose because they had figured out that the soldiers would not follow them in there past sundown. So you can see the trap closing already, can you not, long before anybody felt it? The one rule that kept the soldiers alive was the very thing that made the Blackwood the safest road for a poacher to run. And that meant that sooner or later, some officer was going to look at that situation and decide that the rule was not protecting his men. It was protecting the criminals, and that it had to go. That officer turned out to be Royal Wexler, but I am getting ahead. Will Tice took it on himself, that first autumn, to teach the new lieutenant the country the right way by daylight, the slow way, the way you teach anybody. And to be fair to Wexler, he was a tireless rider, and he learned the ground quick, and he was not afraid of work or weather. They made long patrols together into the edges of the Blackwood through October and November, and for a while it was just hard, ordinary duty, cold camps and cut trails, and once a poacher's old kill site gone to bone, and the lieutenant grew more sure every week that the whole business of the rule was exactly the nonsense he had taken it for. Because nothing happened. That is the thing about that country that you have to understand. Most days, nothing happened. The Blackwood by daylight was just timber, dark and close and quiet, but just timber. A man could patrol it 100 times in the sun and come home 100 times and laugh at the old hands, and he would be right 99 of those times. It was the 100th that the rule was for. The old sergeant said the lieutenant got his first taste of it in November, though Wexler would not have called it that, would have called it wind and nerves and an enlisted man's imagination, even after. They were a little late getting clear that day. Not much. The light was just going amber and long when they came up out of the timber, onto the open bench where the horses were, and the cold was coming down the way it does in that country, all at once, like a lid set on a pot. And from back in the Blackwood behind them, from a good way in, there came a hail. A man's voice calling out. The long-drawn call a lost man makes. Hello. Hello, the camp. Clear as anything, and it called a name. It called for Trooper Sutter, who was one of the men with them that day. Called him by name, twice, in a voice that Sutter went white as the snow to hear, because Sutter said, and Will heard him say it, that it was his brother's voice. His brother, who had died of the typhoid 2 years before in Missouri, 1,000 miles from that mountain. Now here is what soldiers do. Here is what every decent instinct in a man does. You hear a hail like that, you turn around and you go help. And Will Tice said that the whole reason the rule exists, the entire terrible point of it, is that you must not. He had a hand on Sutter's arm before the second call was done, and the old Corporal Greaves had the other, and they held that boy between them, and Will said low and hard into his ear, "That is not your brother. That is not anybody. You do not answer it. You do not look at it. We are walking to the horses now." And they walked him to the horses, with that voice calling his name behind them the whole way, calling it sweeter and more sure the farther they got, the way you would coax a dog that was minded to run, and not one of them turned his head, and they rode out of there in the last of the light with the cold coming down like a hand. And Lieutenant Wexler rode out with them, and he had heard it too, every word, and Will watched him decide on the way home what it had been. "A poacher," the lieutenant said, finally, when they were well clear and the lights of the station were ahead. A poacher playing a trick, having heard the men were soft about that timber, calling a name he could have learned anywhere. And Will did not argue with him, because there is no arguing a man out of the thing he has to believe in, order to keep standing up straight. But he asked the lieutenant one question, quiet. He asked him how a poacher would have known the name of Sutter's dead brother, and said it in the dead brother's own voice, so true that Sutter knew it across 2 years and 1,000 miles. And Wexler did not have an answer for that, and it made him angry not to have one. And Will saw the anger and understood it, and was sorry for it, because he knew what anger like that does to a man. It does not make him careful. It makes him want to prove something. That was the winter the snow came early and deep, and the poaching got bad, worse than anybody had seen. A whole organized outfit working the herds, and the pressure came down from above on Captain Lull to stop it, and Lull put the pressure on Wexler, and Wexler, full of book sense and nerve and a head full of the modern age, and now a hot coal of personal anger besides, began to form the idea that would kill 4 men. He began to think that the way to finally catch the poachers, and to break the foolish rule, and to make his name, all in one stroke, was to do the one thing no patrol had ever done: to go into the Blackwood after them at night. Will Tice told him not to. The old sergeant told him in every way he knew how, plain and then plainer, soldier to officer. As far as he could push it without crossing the line a sergeant cannot cross. He told him the rule was not soft, and it was not superstition, that he had served 18 years under it, and seen things he would not even tell the lieutenant because telling them would only make the man more set. And he asked him, as near to begging as a first sergeant can come, to let the one piece of ground be, to catch his poachers anywhere else on God's earth but there, and after dark never. And Royal Wexler heard him out, the whole thing, courteous enough. And then he said the thing that Will Tice carried to the end of his life. He said, "Sergeant, I will not command men who are afraid of the dark. We go in tonight. So pour yourself a little more and bank the fire up, because the next part is the night patrol, and I will tell it to you the way the old man told it to me, slow, so you do not miss the moment where it could still have been stopped. There is always such a moment. There was one that night, and you will see it go by. Leave the light on." They went in just after full dark, and I want you to picture it the way it was, because the picturing is most of the horror. There were 6 of them. Lieutenant Wexler at the head, because he would lead it himself. That much you have to grant him. He did not send men anywhere he would not go. Will Tice, because Will would not let those men go in without him, for anything in this world. Corporal Anson Greaves, steady as a post. 2 seasoned troopers, Sutter, the one who had hurt his brother, and a man named Pike, and young Newell Rakes. I have to stop on Rakes a moment, because he is the one this costs the most, and you should know him before you lose him. He was 19 years old, and he was from a little farm in Ohio, and he had been at that post about 5 months. And he was the kind of boy that an army makes the most of, and uses the hardest, the eager kind, the kind that wants nothing in the whole world but to do well and be told he did well. He thought Lieutenant Wexler hung the moon. Of course he did. Wexler was everything a boy like that dreams of being: educated and sure and bound for great things. And the lieutenant had been kind to him in the small ways that cost an officer nothing and mean everything to a private. So when Wexler called for volunteers for a thing the old hands plainly dreaded, Newell Rakes stepped up before anybody, shining, glad to be chosen. Will tried to leave him back. The lieutenant overruled it. He wanted, he said, men who were not afraid. And the boy heard that and stood an inch taller, and Will Tice looked at him and felt the bottom go out of his stomach and could do nothing, because a sergeant cannot countermand an officer in front of the men over a feeling. They went in on snowshoes, no horses, the snow too deep and the timber too close. They carried lanterns, but Will made them keep the shutters near closed, just a blade of light at their own feet. And even Wexler did not argue that, because even Wexler did not want to throw light around in there. Whatever he told himself about why, and it was quiet. That is the thing the old man came back to every time he told it. It was so quiet. No wind in that timber, no owl, no branch, nothing but the squeak and crunch of their own snowshoes and their own breath. 6 men breathing, going deeper into a black that closed up behind them like water. For a long time, nothing happened, and Will said that was the worst part, the long nothing, because a man's nerve is a rope, and that quiet just pays it out, and pays it out until there is none left in your hands. Wexler pushed them on, cutting for the poachers' trail, and after a couple of hours they did cut a trail. Real boot tracks in the snow, fresh, and the lieutenant's blood came up, because here was his proof. Here were his men, and he pushed faster along that line, deeper. And Will Tice looked at how far in they were getting, and how late it was, and felt the country settle in around them, attentive, the way a room feels when somebody behind you has quietly stopped what they were doing to watch you. And then, off to the left and away ahead, in the dark, somebody called. It was a small sound at first, just a call. A man's voice, low, easy, the way you would call to someone you knew was nearby. And it called Newell Rakes by his name. Not his last name, the way the army would call him. His first name, Newell. The way his mother would have called him in for supper across a Ohio field. Newell. And the boy stopped dead on his snowshoes, and Will saw his lantern shake. Now you remember the rule. You never answer it. And you remember why the last part of the rule, the part about not going in after a man, is the one that breaks people. And here is where you find out. Because Will Tice was 3 men back in that line, and the boy was up near the lieutenant, and the dark between them was full of close black timber. And the voice called again, Newell, soft and warm and glad, like somebody who has been looking for you a long time and has just this moment found you. And the old sergeant started forward fast, hissing the order low. Do not answer it, Rakes. Do not answer. Hold your post. But there were men and shadows, and snow between them, and the boy could not even see Will's face. And here is the moment I told you to watch for. Here it is going by. Because Lieutenant Wexler was right beside the boy, and if Wexler had said, at that second, the thing the rule says, stand fast, soldier, do not answer, then Rakes would have held, because Rakes would have done anything that man told him. The boy was not going to answer a voice in the dark. He was going to do what his officer said. He turned, in that last second, away from the trees and the voice, and he looked at Lieutenant Wexler, waiting to be told, his whole trusting face turned up, waiting to be told what to do. And Wexler, God help him, Wexler who did not believe, who had heard a poacher's trick in November, and a poacher's trick now. Wexler made a small motion with his hand toward the voice and the trail, and he said, "Go on then, see who it is." He thought he was sending the boy to catch a poacher. You have to understand that. To his last day, Will Tice believed the lieutenant thought he was sending rakes 20 yards to collar a hide thief playing a cruel joke. He did not know he was answering it, but the rule does not care what you think you are doing. The rule only knows that the boy was told, by the one voice on earth, he would obey without question, to go toward it. And so the boy answered it, not with his mouth, with his feet, with his whole glad, obedient heart. He went off the line toward the voice, his little blade of lantern light bobbing away between the black trunks, and he called out as he went, the most ordinary words. He called out, "Coming. Hold on. I am coming." And the dark took the lantern. Not all at once. It just got smaller and dimmer. The way a light does when a man walks away from you through trees, smaller and dimmer, and then around something, and gone, and his footsteps went with it. And then there was the quiet again, that same total quiet, and Newell Rakes was not in it anymore. They went after him. Of course they did. Every part of the rule be damned. 6 soldiers do not stand in the dark and let a boy walk off. And Will Tice will not even tell you. He tried to stop them. Because he did not. He went too. They all went crashing and floundering off the line in the direction the light had gone, calling his name, their own shutters thrown wide now, and the light swinging everywhere. And they found his snowshoe tracks and followed them maybe 40 yards, and the tracks just stopped. Stopped in open, unbroken snow, both feet together, the way a man stops when he is standing still and listening. And ahead of them, there was nothing. No more tracks, no boy, no light, no sound. Just the smooth snow and the black trees, and that listening quiet, closer now, all around them, pleased. Will Tice got them out. I will not pretend it was the lieutenant. Wexler had gone somewhere far back behind his own eyes, and was just standing, staring at the place the tracks ended. And it was the old first sergeant who got them turned and roped together, and moving, who put his own body between the men and the dark, and walked them out of the Blackwood by main force through the rest of that night, the longest night of his long life, with things calling to them out of the timber the whole way, in voices they knew, calling each man by name, sweet and patient, and never once in a hurry, all the way to the gray edge of morning, where the timber finally let them go. 5 of them came out. They had gone in 6. And the thing about it, the thing that Will Tice said, he could never make anybody understand who had not been there, was that it was not finished. He thought, stumbling out into the dawn, that the worst had happened, that they had paid a terrible price and it was over. It was not over. It had not even properly started, because the Blackwood had them all now, every man who had been in there that night and answered it with his feet, and it does not collect all at once. It collects the way a patient man checks a line, one at a time, in its own good time, beginning at first light with the rest of their lives. So leave a light on tonight, the kind at your own door, for somebody you love. And if you ever hear, out past it in the dark, a voice that you know, a voice you have grieved, calling you sweet and sure to come on out and see. You remember Newell Rakes, and you remember what it costs to be glad and obedient and brave at the wrong moment. And you stay inside, and you do not answer, and you let it call. I will tell you the rest by the next fire. The first one went 11 days after. It was Pike, the older trooper, one of the 2 seasoned men who had been on the night patrol. He had drawn a turn standing sentry at the soldier station, an ordinary post, a thing he had done 1,000 nights, walking his round in the cold with his carbine on his shoulder. And in the morning, the relief found him sitting down. He was sitting on the chopping block by the woodpile, with his back against the shed wall, and his carbine across his knees and his hands folded on it, easy, the way a man sits to rest a minute. And he was dead, and he was cold, colder than the night could account for, frozen through, with a rime of frost stood up white on his coat and his eyebrows and his folded hands, though it had not been a hard night and no other man on the post had so much as chapped. There was not a mark on him. His face was not afraid. He looked, Will Tice said, like a man who had heard something he was glad to hear, and had sat down to listen to it, and had simply never gotten back up. The post surgeon wrote it down as exposure and heart failure, which is a thing that does happen to a man on a cold sentry post, and everybody who had not been in the Blackwood was satisfied with that, and everybody who had been in the Blackwood knew better and said nothing. That is the part I have to make you feel, the silence of it, because it is its own kind of horror, and it is the most human part of this whole account. There was no announcement. There was no officer who stood up and said, "Men, a thing is among us, and it is taking the ones who went into that timber." There was just a garrison full of soldiers, most of whom knew nothing, and a small handful who knew everything, going about the ordinary business of a winter post, while the small handful got smaller. Captain Lowell knew. Will was sure to his death that Lowell knew, or knew enough. But a captain of cavalry, in the year 1903, cannot write in his official report that a thing out of the southeast timber is calling his troopers out into the snow by the voices of their dead, because the next thing that happens is they take his command away and put him somewhere with soft walls. So Lowell wrote exposure, and he wrote accident, and he quietly stopped sending any patrol toward the Blackwood for any reason at all, and he never once spoke of it plain, not even to Will, not even at the end. The army did not cover it up out of some grand conspiracy. It covered it up the way men always cover up the thing they cannot afford to have be true, by agreeing, without ever saying so, to call it something else. The second one was Sutter, the man who had hurt his brother in November. They found him out past the corral in January, in the snow, on his back, looking up, peaceful, frozen, no mark. The frost stood up white on him. He had walked out there in the night in his stocking feet, his boots left side by his bunk. Neat the way you leave them when you're coming right back. Something had called, and this time, alone, in the dark, with no Will Tice to put a hand on his arm, he had answered it and gone out in his sock feet across the snow toward the voice of somebody he loved, and it had taken him gentle, the way it took them all, out in the cold, sitting or lying easy, glad. And here is the thing that started to break the men who were left. It was not the dying. Soldiers in that country died, of the cold and the work and bad luck. It was the way of it. It was that you could not run from it, and you could not fight it, and you could not even see it. There was nothing to shoot. There was no enemy to charge. There was only the cold and the dark. And at night now, more and more, there were the voices. Because once it had a man, Will said, once it had taken him into itself, it could call in his voice too. The Blackwood used what it took. So the men who lay awake in that barracks through that long winter, the few who knew, they began to hear Pike out in the dark some nights, and then Sutter, calling soft to the men who had been their friends, calling them by their first names, telling them it was all right, telling them to come on out, it did not hurt, come and see. Their own dead friends, lonesome for them, patient, calling. You can stand a great deal, as a man. You can stand a monster in the dark. What you can hardly stand is your friend in the dark, the one you drank with, and froze with, and laughed with, calling you by your name in his own true voice, asking you, sad and gentle, to come on out and be with him. That is built to undo you. It is made for exactly the loyal grieving place in a man where his guard is weakest. And one by one that winter it found that place, and the post lost its men, and called them exposure. And the snow came down and covered the new graves, and the few who knew kept the rule, and kept their mouths shut and did not sleep. Will Tice kept them alive as long as he could, by main strength and discipline. He moved the men who knew into one room, and he would not let them stand a post alone after dark. And he sat up with them himself, night after night, an old sergeant going gray and hollow, holding the line the only way he knew, by being there, by saying the rule out loud, by reaching out and taking a man hard by the arm, when his eyes started toward the door. Do not answer it. That is not Pike. That is not your brother. That is not the boy. Hold your post. He said it 10,000 times that winter. He kept 3 men alive, saying it who would have died without him. And then, late, in the deepest part of the winter, the Blackwood learned its cruelest trick, and it turned that very thing against him. It started calling in the voice of Newell Rakes, and it did not call for the other men. It called for Will. Some nights, out past the frozen parade ground, out toward the southeast, where that black timber lay under the snow, a long day's travel off, and somehow no distance at all, the old sergeant would hear the boy. Newell Rakes, 19 years old, the boy he had tried to leave back, the boy he had failed to save, calling him by the name only friends used. Will. Will. Soft and not accusing. That was the worst of it. Never accusing, only lonesome and glad and trusting. The same shining, trusting voice that had said, "Coming, hold on, I am coming." The night the dark took the lantern, calling the old man out, telling him it was all right, telling him to come and find him. He was just here, just at the edge of the timber. Come on, Will, come and bring me home. And Will Tice, who had saved 3 men by being the one who never broke, sat in the dark every one of those nights with his own dead boy calling him by name out of the snow, and he did not answer. He did not go to the door. He did not so much as turn his face toward the window. He sat with his hands gripped together until they cramped, and he let the boy call him, and he did not answer, and the dawn came, and he was still there, night after night after night. It was, he told me, when he was a very old man, and had buried 2 wives, and outlived nearly everyone he ever knew, the single hardest thing he ever did, in a long life that had no shortage of hard things, to sit still and silent, and let that boy call him home, and to know, the whole time, exactly what it was asking, and exactly what it would cost the boy's memory to refuse him, and to refuse him anyway, every night, because that was the rule. You do not answer it, not even that, especially not that. There was one man left who had not yet been taken, and did not yet understand he could not win. One man who still thought there was something out there he could face down and beat. And it had saved him for last, the way it saves the biggest thing for last. It had saved Lieutenant Royal Wexler. So bank your fire one more time and stay with me for the end of it, because the end is the hardest part, and it is also, if there is any mercy at all in this account, the part that tells you how a man lives through such a thing, and why. Leave the light on. And if it is your own grief that ever calls you, in a voice you would give your soul to answer, you remember old Will Tice in the dark with his hands locked together, and you hold your post. Lieutenant Wexler held out the longest, and he held out the hardest. And there is something terrible in the watching of that. A brave man fighting a thing that cannot be fought. Because he understood by then. That is what changed in him over that winter. And it was a worse thing to watch than the dying. The night patrol had broken something open in Royal Wexler. And through the crack came the knowledge, slow and total, of what he had done. He had not lost a man to a poacher's trick. He had stood next to a boy who trusted him with his whole heart. At the one moment in that boy's life when a single word would have saved him, and he had waved his hand and sent him into the dark. The lieutenant could not get away from that. He stopped being ambitious. He stopped being sure. He stopped mostly being anything at all but a man carrying a thing too heavy to carry. And Will Tice, who had every reason in the world to hate him, found that he could not, because there is no punishment you could invent for Royal Wexler, worse than the one he had already started serving inside his own head. And the Blackwood knew it. That is the thing. It always knew exactly where a man was softest. And Wexler's soft place was the biggest and the rawest of all of them, because it was made of guilt, and guilt is even stronger than grief. So when it finally came for him, late that winter, it did not call in the voice of his mother or some dead sweetheart. It was cleverer than that. It called in the voice of Newell Rakes. And to Wexler it did not call sweet and lonesome the way it called to Will. To Wexler, the boy's voice called out, as if it were still that night, still lost in the timber, still trusting, calling out, "Coming, hold on. Where are you, sir? I cannot find the line, sir. Please, I am turned around. Come and find me." It gave the lieutenant, over and over, night after night, the one thing he wanted more than his life, and could never have, which was the chance to go back into that dark and bring the boy out, to fix it, to answer this time the right way. You see what it was doing? It was not luring Wexler with something he loved. It was luring him with his own absolution. And there is no bait on this earth set deeper into a man than the chance to undo the worst thing he ever did. Will Tice watched him fight it, the way he had watched all of them, and the lieutenant fought it longer than any of them, because shame can hold a man upright after everything else in him wants to lie down. He sat up with his lamp lit and his pistol in his lap, which told Will he understood at last that there was something to be afraid of, and that he had finally, far too late, decided to keep the rule. For weeks he kept it. He did not answer. He sat in his quarters and let the boy beg him for help out of the dark, and he gripped that pistol, and he did not go. And Will thought, God forgive him. Will let himself begin to hope that the lieutenant might be the second man to live through it. It took him on a still night near the end of February, and it took him the way it takes a man whose guard is made of guilt, which is to say it did not break his guard, it turned it. Nobody knows exactly what was said to him that last night, what particular thing the boy's voice told him, because he went alone and quiet, and there was no one to hear. But Will Tice, who had thought about it for 60 years when he told me, believed that the voice stopped asking the lieutenant to come find him and started instead to forgive him. He believed that the last thing Royal Wexler heard, the thing that finally got him up out of that chair and unlatched the door and walked him out across the snow in the dark, was Newell Rakes telling him that it was all right, sir, that he was not angry, that he understood, and that if the lieutenant would only come on out, just come out here into the dark, The two of them could be square, and it would not hurt, and everything heavy could be set down at last. They found him in the morning, a little way out, past the edge of the post, sitting in the snow, facing the southeast, facing the Blackwood. The pistol was still in his hand, and it had not been fired. There was frost, stood up white on him, and no mark on him, and his face was not afraid. His face, Will told me, and this is the only part of the whole account where the old man's voice would go. His face looked relieved, like a man who had finally been told he could put a thing down. The lieutenant had carried his guilt out into the dark, and the dark had promised to take it from him, and it had kept that promise in the only way it ever keeps any promise, which is to take the man along with it, and that was the last of them. 6 men into the Blackwood on a winter night, and 1 boy taken in the timber, and 4 men taken across the year that followed, each one out in the cold, each one with no wound, each one glad, and 1 man who walked in and walked out and lived. So let me close out the things I can close, the way the old man closed them for me, because you have sat up this whole long night, and you have earned the few answers there are. Why did Will Tice live, when better men than him, and worse, all died? Not luck. He kept the rule, every part of it, and the hardest part most of all. He never once answered it, not the strangers' voices, and not his friends' voices, and not, on all those terrible nights, the voice of the boy he loved and failed, calling him home by his own name. He sat in the dark, and he let it call, and he held his post. And so the Blackwood never got the one thing it needed from him, which was his answer, his yes, his step toward it of his own will. It cannot take what does not come. That is the whole of the rule, in the end, under all 5 parts of it. It cannot take what does not come. What was it? I cannot tell you, and Will could not either, and Pasega the old scout would not, and I have come to think that the not knowing is part of the true shape of the thing. It was old, and it was patient, and it kept that timber, and it hunted the one weakness that even the bravest and hardest men cannot drill out of themselves, which is the need to answer when someone we love calls to us in the dark. That is all I can honestly say it was. It was the price of having a heart, waiting in a particular black stand of trees, in a country that was already somebody's. And what became of it? Nothing became of it. That is the last cold truth of this account, and I will not soften it for you. The army never went back into the Blackwood after dark. Not that year, and not ever. They let the piece of ground be. The unspoken protocol held, soldier to soldier, right up until the cavalry handed the park over to the new ranger service after the Great War, and the old log from the Spruce Creek station, with its strange short winter of men who did not return, got boxed up and forgotten in a government file where a researcher found it a lifetime later and could make no sense of it at all. The timber is still down there in the southeast of that park tonight, exactly where it always was, dark and close and quiet, keeping itself in no hurry, the way it has kept itself since before there was a fort or a flag or a single human memory of when it started. And every so often, the rangers in that country will tell you, if you ask the right old one the right way, that there is a stretch of back timber down that way, that the service does not work after dark, and that nobody can quite tell you why. Only that you want to be out of it before the sun is off it, and that if you are ever in there at dusk, and you hear somebody call your name, you do not answer. So here is the only thing I would have you carry out of these woods, and it is the same thing Will Tice spent 60 years wishing one proud young officer had understood in time. The dark will call you in a voice you love, not a stranger's voice, not a monster's. The voice of the one you grieve the most, sweet and patient and glad, asking you only to come out and be with them, promising it will not hurt. And everything tender and loyal and human in you will want to answer. That want is not a weakness in you. It is the best thing in you. And that is exactly why it is the bait. So you hold your post. You keep your light at your own door. And whatever calls you out into the cold, however well you know its voice, however much you have missed it, you let it call, and you do not go. Stay in tonight. Keep your own light burning, and tell me down in the comments who you would be most afraid to hear yelling out there in the dark. The one voice you are not sure you could keep from answering. Be honest. I will be down there reading, same as always. Hold your post, and I will see you next time by the next fire.